Imagine standing on a shoreline that no human being has ever seen, while the sky glows a color that does not exist today, and the waves wash over creatures that look nothing like anything alive now. In the shallow water nearby, a strange armor-plated animal glides past on many jointed legs, its body shaped like a shield and its eyes perched on stalks, quietly watching a world that feels almost like another planet. Far out at sea, a giant, soft-bodied hunter moves through the dim light with long, ribbon-like fins, its outline so unusual that, if you saw it in a dream, you might doubt it had ever been real. Tonight, we drift into the hidden history of such beings, into the lives of prehistoric creatures so wonderfully odd that they gently bend the limits of imagination. These are the ancient residents of Earth that rarely appear in school books, the overlooked experimenters of evolution that thrived in oceans, swamps, and forests long before the familiar age of dinosaurs. As we continue through their quiet story, if you enjoy calm science journeys like this, you can quietly support this channel by liking this video and subscribing for more sleepy science nights. Now, let us begin our journey in the most ancient of seas, in waters so old that the very concept of a backbone had not yet been invented. Picture an ocean that stretches endlessly beneath a pale and ancient sun. An ocean without fish as we know them, without whales or dolphins or sharks. Instead, the waters are filled with soft-bodied creatures drifting like living clouds through the gentle currents. This is the world of the Cambrian period, more than 500 million years ago, a time when life was conducting its very first experiments in what it meant to have a body. In these quiet waters, there lived a creature so strange that when scientists first discovered its fossils, they put it together upside down and backward. They called it hallucigenia because it seemed like something from a fever dream, something too impossible to be real. Imagine a creature no bigger than your thumb, shaped like a slender worm, walking across the ancient seafloor on 7 pairs of delicate, stilt-like legs. Along its back rose a row of long, sharp spines, like tiny towers reaching up toward the surface. Its head was small and simple, with a round mouth that opened and closed as it gently probed the sediment for food. For years, scientists thought those spines were its legs, and those legs were its spines. They imagined it walking on its points, like some sort of surreal pincushion creature. But as more fossils were found, the truth slowly emerged. Hallucigenia walked on its soft legs, and the spines were its armor, its protection against the many predators that roamed those ancient seas. It was a gentle creature, a quiet wanderer of the deep, and it reminds us that even the strangest forms can find a way to survive, can find a place in the grand tapestry of life. Swimming above hallucigenia, through the dappled light that filtered down from the surface, there glided one of the most peculiar hunters the world has ever known. Its name is Opabinia, and if you were to see it today, you might think you were looking at something designed by a particularly creative child. Opabinia had 5 eyes, arranged in a gentle curve across the top of its head, each one a small dome, gazing outward at the world. From the front of its face extended a long, flexible trunk, like a tiny elephant's nose, ending in a grasping claw. Its body was soft and segmented, rippling with fins that helped it glide through the water with an almost dreamlike grace. Opabinia was not very large, perhaps 3 or 4 inches from the tip of its strange trunk to the end of its fan-shaped tail. But in those ancient seas, where most creatures were smaller than a grain of rice, Opabinia was a giant, a gentle giant, that used its remarkable trunk to reach into crevices and pull out smaller creatures to eat. It swam with a slow, undulating motion, its 5 eyes scanning the waters for food, for danger, for whatever the ancient ocean might offer. When scientists first presented a reconstruction of Opabinia at a scientific conference in the 1970s, the audience reportedly burst into laughter. It seemed too absurd, too wonderfully weird to be real. But Opabinia was indeed real, and it reminds us that nature has always had a sense of imagination far beyond our own. As we drift a little further through these primordial waters, we encounter the largest predator of its time, a creature that ruled the Cambrian seas with an almost gentle authority. This is Anomalocaris, the strange shrimp, though it was neither strange to itself nor truly a shrimp at all. Anomalocaris could grow to over 3 feet in length, which made it a true giant in a world of tiny creatures. Its body was flattened and flexible, edged with lobed fins that rippled in waves as it swam, propelling it through the water with surprising speed and grace. At the front of its head, 2 large segmented appendages curved downward like the arms of a praying mantis, each one lined with sharp spines that could grasp and hold prey. Its eyes were enormous, among the most sophisticated eyes of any animal at that time, with thousands of individual lenses that gave it excellent vision in the dim waters. Anomalocaris fed on the soft-bodied creatures of the Cambrian seas, perhaps using its great appendages to crush their shells or to sweep them toward its circular pineapple slice-shaped mouth. It was the top predator of its world, yet there was something almost graceful about it, something peaceful in the way it swam through its ancient domain. Let us pause here for a moment in these quiet Cambrian waters and simply breathe. The creatures of this ancient time are so different from anything alive today, so wonderfully alien, that it can take a moment to adjust, to let their strangeness settle into something comfortable. They lived their lives fully, completely, without any knowledge that one day creatures like us would look back across the vast gulf of time and wonder at their forms. They ate and swam and reproduced and died, leaving only their faint impressions in the stone for us to find. And in those impressions, we can glimpse something of the endless creativity of life, the way it tries every possible shape and form, searching always for what works, for what survives. As the millions of years drifted by like clouds across the sky, new creatures emerged to take their place in the ever-changing story of life. The seas began to fill with creatures that had backbones, the first fish, though many of them were so different from modern fish that they seem like creatures from another world entirely. In the deep, dark waters of the Devonian period, about 360 million years ago, there swam a fish so heavily armored that it looked more like a living tank than a swimmer. This was Dunkleosteus, and it was one of the most formidable predators the world has ever known. Dunkleosteus could grow to over 20 feet in length, perhaps even longer, and its head and the front of its body were covered in thick, bony plates that formed an almost impenetrable armor. It had no teeth in the conventional sense. Instead, its jaws were formed from sharp, self-sharpening plates of bone that could slice through almost anything. When Dunkleosteus bit down, it did so with one of the most powerful bites of any fish that has ever lived, a bite that could crush bone and shell and the armored bodies of other fish with equal ease. Yet, despite its fearsome reputation, Dunkleosteus was simply doing what all predators do, finding its place in the ecosystem, filling a role that needed to be filled. Imagine Dunkleosteus swimming slowly through the Devonian seas, its armored head catching the dim light from above, its great eyes scanning the waters for prey. It moved with a ponderous grace, like a submarine drifting through the depths. Other fish scattered before it, hiding in the rocks and coral, waiting for the great predator to pass. And when it found its prey, Dunkleosteus would open its massive jaws and strike with a speed that belied its size, snapping shut with a force that could cut a smaller fish in half. It was a creature perfectly adapted to its world, a world that no longer exists except in the fossils that tell its story. In those same ancient seas, there lived another fish with a feature so bizarre that it puzzled scientists for over a century. This was Helicoprion, the spiral saw shark, though it was not actually a shark at all, but a distant relative. Helicoprion looked fairly ordinary for a fish of its time, with a streamlined body and fins for swimming. But in its lower jaw, where you might expect to find normal teeth, there grew a spiral of teeth that looked exactly like a circular saw blade. This spiral, called a tooth whorl, could grow to contain over 150 individual teeth, coiled around and around in a tight spiral that protruded from the fish's mouth. For many years, scientists had no idea how this tooth whorl actually worked. Some thought it extended from the fish's dorsal fin, like a strange biological circular saw. Others imagined it coiling out from the nose like a weaponized elephant trunk. It was only recently, with the help of advanced scanning technology, that the truth was finally revealed. The tooth whorl sat in the lower jaw, curling backward into the throat, and as Helicoprion fed, the spiral would unroll and snap forward, slicing through its prey like a saw through wood. New teeth grew at the center of the spiral, pushing the older teeth outward so that Helicoprion never lost its cutting edge. It was a unique solution to the problem of eating, a solution that no other creature before or since has ever discovered. Let us drift now from the seas to the land, from the world of fins and gills to the world of legs and lungs. The transition from water to land was one of the great adventures of life on Earth, a slow and gradual journey that took millions of years to complete. And along the way, life experimented with forms so strange and wonderful that they seem almost like creatures from a fairy tale, gentle giants and peculiar wanderers that have long since vanished from the world. In the vast forests of the Carboniferous period, about 300 million years ago, the air was thick with oxygen, richer in oxygen than it has ever been before or since. This abundance of oxygen allowed insects and other creatures to grow to sizes that seem almost impossible today. Through the towering ferns and giant horsetails of those ancient forests, there crawled a creature that would make most modern humans very nervous indeed. This was Arthropleura, the giant millipede, and it could grow to over 8 feet in length, making it the largest land-dwelling invertebrate that has ever lived. But do not be afraid of Arthropleura, for despite its intimidating size, it was almost certainly a gentle giant, a peaceful vegetarian that spent its days munching on fallen leaves and rotting wood. Its body was covered in segmented armor, each segment bearing 2 pairs of legs, so that when it walked, it moved in a slow, undulating wave that carried it across the forest floor. Imagine it now, this great creature making its unhurried way through the prehistoric forest, its many legs rustling softly through the leaf litter, its simple eyes watching for predators, its only concern finding the next meal of decaying vegetation. Arthropleura lived in a world of giants, where dragonflies had wingspans of 2 feet and scorpions grew to the size of small dogs. But among all these giants, Arthropleura was one of the gentlest, a peaceful herbivore in a world that was still learning what it meant to live on land. Flying above the forests of that ancient time, on wings that spanned over 2 feet from tip to tip, there soared a creature that looked like a dragonfly from a dream. This was Meganeura, the giant dragonfly, one of the largest flying insects that has ever existed. Meganeura hunted other insects on the wing, its enormous eyes tracking the movements of its prey with precision, its powerful jaws capable of catching and consuming creatures almost as large as itself. Yet despite its size and its predatory nature, there was something almost peaceful about Meganeura, something graceful in the way it drifted through the warm, humid air of the Carboniferous forests. The forests themselves were like nothing on Earth today. The trees were not like modern trees at all, but rather giant relatives of the tiny club mosses and horsetails that grow in our gardens today. They rose to heights of 100 feet or more, their bark covered in strange diamond-shaped patterns, their crowns spreading out like great green umbrellas. When these trees fell, they piled up in great layers on the forest floor, slowly compressing over millions of years to form the coal deposits that we still mine today. In a very real sense, when we burn coal, we are burning the ancient sunlight captured by these prehistoric forests, releasing energy that has been stored for over 300 million years. As we continue our journey through time, we come to an era that many people find particularly fascinating, though for reasons that they might not expect. This is the Permian period, a time that began about 290 million years ago and ended with the greatest mass extinction in the history of life on Earth. But before that catastrophe, the Permian was home to some of the most bizarre and wonderful creatures that have ever walked the land, creatures that seem to bridge the gap between the age of reptiles and the age of mammals that was yet to come. One of the most famous of these creatures, though perhaps not as famous as it deserves to be, was Dimetrodon. You might have seen Dimetrodon in pictures or in toy sets, often mixed in with dinosaurs, though Dimetrodon was not a dinosaur at all. It lived and died millions of years before the first dinosaurs appeared. Dimetrodon was a synapsid, a member of the group of animals that would eventually give rise to mammals, including us. It looked something like a large lizard, growing up to 15 feet in length, with a long tail and powerful jaws filled with sharp teeth. But its most remarkable feature was the great sail that rose from its back, a fan of skin stretched over long spines that extended from its vertebrae. No one knows for certain what this sail was for. Perhaps it helped Dimetrodon regulate its body temperature, absorbing heat from the morning sun and radiating heat away during the hot afternoon. Perhaps it was a display structure used to attract mates or intimidate rivals. Perhaps it served both purposes, or neither. What we do know is that Dimetrodon was one of the top predators of its time, a fearsome hunter that preyed on the other animals of the Permian swamps and forests. Yet, even predators have their peaceful moments, their quiet times of rest and digestion, and we can imagine Dimetrodon basking in the gentle warmth of the prehistoric sun, its great sail catching the light, its eyes slowly closing as it drifted into a contented sleep. Living alongside Dimetrodon, there were creatures even stranger, creatures that seemed to have been designed by a particularly whimsical creator. One of these was Esteminosicus, a large and rather ungainly animal that looked like a cross between a hippopotamus and a mutant moose. Esteminosicus could grow to about 15 feet in length and weighed perhaps a ton or more. Its body was barrel-shaped and heavy, supported on thick, sturdy legs. But its head was truly remarkable, adorned with a crown of bony knobs and projections that gave it an appearance unlike any other creature before or since. Some of these knobs projected upward, like short horns, while others grew outward like fleshy antlers, giving Esteminosicus a profile that was both bizarre and somehow endearing. Scientists believe these structures were probably used for display, perhaps for attracting mates or for recognizing members of the same species. Esteminosicus was an herbivore, spending its days browsing on the vegetation of the Permian forests, its strange head bobbing gently as it walked from plant to plant. It was one of the early experiments in large-bodied plant eating, a gentle giant in a world that was full of such experiments. Another creature of this era was Cotylorhynchus, a massive synapsid that could grow to over 20 feet in length, making it one of the largest land animals of its time. Cotylorhynchus had a tiny head attached to an enormous, barrel-shaped body, giving it proportions that seem almost comical by modern standards. Its head was so small compared to its body that it looks like someone made a mistake, like a sculptor who used the wrong scale for different parts of the same creature. But Cotylorhynchus was very real, and its strange proportions were perfectly suited to its way of life. Cotylorhynchus was an herbivore, and its small head was actually all it needed to consume the low-growing plants that made up its diet. Its enormous body was essentially a giant fermentation chamber, a living vat where tough plant material was slowly broken down and digested by the billions of microorganisms that lived in its gut. It spent its days wandering slowly through the prehistoric landscape, stopping frequently to feed, its tiny head nibbling at the vegetation while its massive body processed the meals of previous days. There was nothing hurried about Cotylorhynchus, nothing urgent or stressed. It simply existed, peacefully, in the warm world of the Permian, unaware of the catastrophe that was slowly building on the horizon. Let us pause here, in the gentle warmth of the Permian period, and take a moment to appreciate the peacefulness of deep time. These creatures that we have been describing, these strange and wonderful beasts, had no knowledge of us, no inkling that one day, hundreds of millions of years in the future, someone would lie in bed and listen to their stories. They simply lived their lives, eating and sleeping and raising their young, as all creatures do. And in that simplicity, there is something profoundly calming, something that reminds us that the worries of today are small compared to the vast sweep of time, that whatever troubles us now will one day be as forgotten as the footprints of Cotylorhynchus in the ancient mud. The Permian period came to an end about 252 million years ago, in an event so catastrophic that it nearly ended life on Earth entirely. This was the Great Dying, the Permian-Triassic extinction event, and it wiped out perhaps 90% of all species in the oceans and 70% of all species on land. The causes are still debated, but most scientists believe that massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia released enormous quantities of carbon dioxide and other gases into the atmosphere, triggering runaway global warming, ocean acidification, and the collapse of ecosystems worldwide. But life, as it always does, found a way to survive. And from the survivors of that great catastrophe, new forms emerged, new experiments in what it meant to be alive. The Triassic period that followed was a time of recovery and innovation, a time when the ancestors of dinosaurs and crocodiles and mammals all competed for dominance in a world that was still healing from its wounds. And among the creatures of this era, there were some that were truly, wonderfully bizarre. One of the strangest was Tanistropheus, a reptile that looked like it had been stretched on a rack. Tanistropheus could grow to about 20 feet in length, but over half of that length was neck. Its neck was incredibly long and stiff, made up of only about a dozen elongated vertebrae, each one as long as the trunk of a small tree. This gave Tanistropheus a profile that seems almost impossible, like a snake with legs attached at one end. Its head was small and equipped with sharp teeth, perfect for catching fish and other small prey. And at the end of its body was a relatively short tail and a pair of strong hind legs. Scientists are still debating exactly how Tanistropheus lived. Some believe it was aquatic, swimming through the shallow seas of the Triassic and using its long neck to reach into crevices and holes where fish might hide. Others believe it was semi-aquatic, spending some time on land and some time in the water, perhaps using its neck like a fishing pole to catch prey from the shore. What we do know is that Tanistropheus was successful, surviving for millions of years and leaving fossils across Europe and the Middle East. Its long neck, as strange as it seems to us, was clearly an effective adaptation, a solution to the problem of catching prey that worked well enough to persist through countless generations. Another peculiar creature of the Triassic was Cheirolvipteryx, a small reptile that seems to have experimented with a very unusual form of flight. Most flying and gliding animals have wings attached to their front limbs, but Cherovipteryx did things differently. Its front limbs were small and relatively weak, but its hind limbs were long and connected to broad membranes of skin that stretched from its legs to its tail. When Cherovipteryx leaped from a branch or a cliff, it could spread these membranes and glide through the air, not with its arms but with its legs, like a living hang glider that had been assembled backward. Cherovipteryx was only about 1 foot in length, including its long tail, and it probably spent its time hunting insects and other small prey in the trees and rocks of its Triassic home. Its flight was probably not very powerful or controlled, more of a controlled fall than true flying, but it was enough to help it escape predators and to reach new hunting grounds. Cherovipteryx reminds us that evolution has no predetermined plan, no blueprint that it follows. It simply tries everything, every possible variation, and keeps what works. And sometimes, what works is a creature that glides with its legs instead of its arms, a creature that seems to defy the rules of how animals should be built. As we gently move on through the Triassic period, we encounter another creature that seems to have been designed by a particularly creative imagination. This is Longisquama, a small reptile whose name means long scales, and whose most remarkable feature was a row of long, feather-like structures that grew from its back. These structures were perhaps 8 inches long, far longer than the body of the animal itself, and they rose from its spine like a bizarre crest of plumes. No one knows for certain what these structures were for, or even exactly what they were. Some scientists have suggested they were early feathers, hinting at a relationship with birds. Others believe they were simply elaborate display structures, used for attracting mates or intimidating rivals. Longisquama was a small creature, probably no more than 6 inches long without its remarkable crest, and it probably spent its time hunting insects among the plants of the Triassic. Its long structures may have been brightly colored, may have been used in elaborate courtship displays, or may have served some purpose that we cannot even imagine. What we do know is that Longisquama was part of the great experimentation of life in the Triassic, one of countless creatures trying to find new ways to survive in a world that was still recovering from catastrophe. And in its strange beauty, there is something that speaks to the endless creativity of evolution, the way it produces forms that seem like art, like sculpture, like the fever dreams of a brilliant and slightly eccentric designer. The Triassic gave way to the Jurassic, and the Jurassic to the Cretaceous. And during these long ages, the dinosaurs rose to dominance, ruling the land for over 160 million years. The dinosaurs are well known, of course. The great sauropods with their long necks, the fierce theropods with their sharp teeth, the gentle ornithopods grazing in prehistoric meadows. But among the dinosaurs, there were some that were so strange, so wonderfully bizarre, that they deserve a special place in our journey tonight. One of these was Therizinosaurus, a dinosaur that seemed to have been assembled from spare parts of several different animals. Therizinosaurus was a theropod, a member of the same group that includes Tyrannosaurus and Velociraptor, but it had evolved in a direction that was utterly unlike its carnivorous cousins. Therizinosaurus was an herbivore, a gentle giant that spent its days browsing on the vegetation of the Cretaceous forests. Its body was large and heavy, supported on thick, sturdy legs, and its small head was equipped with a beak rather than the sharp teeth of its predatory relatives. But the most remarkable feature of Therizinosaurus was its arms, and specifically, its claws. From each of its 3-fingered hands extended a set of enormous claws, curved blades of keratin that could grow to over 3 feet in length. These were the longest claws of any animal that has ever lived, longer than swords, longer than some people are tall. And yet, despite their fearsome appearance, these claws were probably not used for hunting at all. Therizinosaurus was a plant eater, and its great claws were most likely used for pulling down branches, for stripping leaves from trees, perhaps for digging up roots and tubers from the ground. Imagine Therizinosaurus now, standing in a clearing in the Cretaceous forest, its great claws reaching up into the canopy, pulling down a branch laden with leaves. It chews slowly, thoughtfully, its small head bobbing gently as it eats. Around it, the forest is alive with the sounds of insects and birds, the distant calls of other dinosaurs, the soft rustle of wind through the ancient trees. Therizinosaurus is at peace here, content in its world, unaware that its time is slowly running out, that in just a few million years, a catastrophe from space will bring the age of dinosaurs to a sudden and violent end. Another strange dinosaur of the Cretaceous was Deinocheirus, a creature that puzzled scientists for decades, because for many years, all they had were its arms. And what arms they were, over 8 feet long, equipped with large curving claws that suggested a creature of enormous size and power. Scientists speculated wildly about what the rest of Deinocheirus might have looked like, imagining everything from a massive predator to a supersized ostrich. And when more complete fossils were finally discovered in the early 2010s, the truth was stranger than anyone had imagined. Deinocheirus was indeed enormous, one of the largest ornithomimosaurs, the ostrich-like dinosaurs that roamed the Cretaceous landscapes. It could grow to over 30 feet in length and weigh several tons, far larger than any of its relatives. But it was also bizarre in its proportions, with a long neck, a duck-like bill, a humped back, and those incredible arms ending in massive claws. Deinocheirus was probably an omnivore, eating plants and fish, and perhaps small animals, wading through the rivers and lakes of what is now Mongolia, using its great claws to gather food and perhaps to defend itself from predators. The discovery of Deinocheirus reminds us that the fossil record is incomplete, that for every creature we know about, there are probably dozens that have left no trace, that lived and died without ever being preserved in stone. It reminds us that our knowledge of the past is always provisional, always subject to revision as new fossils are found and new techniques are developed. And it reminds us that the ancient world was full of wonders, full of creatures that we are only beginning to understand, creatures whose stories are waiting to be told. Let us drift now from the land back to the sea, for the oceans of the Mesozoic era were home to creatures just as strange and wonderful as those on land. While dinosaurs ruled the continents, the seas were dominated by a variety of marine reptiles, creatures that had evolved from land-dwelling ancestors and returned to the water, developing fins and flippers and streamlined bodies for a life beneath the waves. One of the most peculiar of these marine creatures was Elasmosaurus, a plesiosaur with a neck so long that it seems almost impossible. Elasmosaurus could grow to over 40 feet in length, and more than half of that length was neck. Its neck contained over 70 vertebrae, more than any other animal that has ever lived, and it was incredibly flexible, allowing Elasmosaurus to twist and turn its head in ways that seem almost serpentine. At the end of this remarkable neck was a small head equipped with sharp, interlocking teeth, perfect for catching fish and squid. Elasmosaurus swam with 4 large flippers, which it used in a motion somewhat like an underwater flight, beating its flippers up and down to propel itself through the water. It probably hunted by swimming beneath schools of fish and then sweeping its long neck upward, catching its prey from below before they could escape. It was a graceful hunter, a creature perfectly adapted to its watery world, and it reminds us that the sea has always been a place of strange and wonderful forms, a place where the rules of the land do not apply. Another marine reptile of this era was Mosasaurus, a giant predator that ruled the seas of the late Cretaceous. Mosasaurus was not a dinosaur, but rather a close relative of modern lizards and snakes, though it had evolved into something far larger and more formidable than any lizard alive today. Mosasaurus could grow to over 50 feet in length, making it one of the largest marine predators of its time. Its body was long and streamlined, powered by a great tail that swept from side to side, driving it through the water at remarkable speeds. Mosasaurus had a long, powerful jaw filled with curved teeth, perfect for seizing and holding prey. It fed on fish, on sea turtles, on other marine reptiles, on anything that it could catch and swallow. It was the top predator of its marine ecosystem, a creature that feared nothing except perhaps others of its own kind. And yet, for all its fearsome reputation, Mosasaurus was simply doing what all predators do, filling a role in the ecosystem, keeping populations of prey species in check, participating in the great dance of life and death that has continued for billions of years. As we continue our journey, let us pause for a moment to appreciate the vastness of time that we are traveling through. The Mesozoic era, the age of dinosaurs and marine reptiles, lasted for over 180 million years. That is a span of time so vast that it is almost impossible for our human minds to comprehend. To put it in perspective, our own species, Homo sapiens, has existed for perhaps 300,000 years. The dinosaurs ruled the Earth for 600 times longer than we have existed. And yet, even the dinosaurs were newcomers compared to the first life on Earth, which appeared over 3.5 billion years ago. When we look back through deep time, we are looking at a story that is almost unimaginably old, a story that makes our own existence seem like the blink of an eye, the flutter of a moth's wing in the darkness, And in that vastness, there is something profoundly calming. The worries of our daily lives, the stresses and anxieties that keep us awake at night, are small compared to the sweep of geological time. The creatures we are learning about tonight lived and died millions of years before any human drew breath, and yet the world continued, life continued. New forms arose to take the place of those that had passed. There is a steadiness to deep time, a rhythm of change and continuity that transcends any individual life, any individual species, any individual era. And in that steadiness, we can find a kind of peace, a reminder that we are part of something much larger than ourselves, something that will continue long after we are gone. The age of dinosaurs came to an end about 66 million years ago, when an asteroid, perhaps 6 miles across, struck the Earth near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. The impact released energy equivalent to billions of nuclear bombs, triggering earthquakes, tsunamis, and worldwide firestorms. Debris thrown into the atmosphere blocked out the sun, causing global temperatures to plummet. Within a few years, the dinosaurs were gone, along with the marine reptiles, the flying pterosaurs, and countless other creatures that had flourished during the Mesozoic era. But, once again, life found a way to survive. The survivors of this great catastrophe, the small mammals and birds and reptiles that had managed to cling on through the devastation, began to diversify and spread, filling the niches left empty by the dinosaurs. The age of mammals had begun, and with it came a whole new cast of strange and wonderful creatures, beasts that seem almost as bizarre as any dinosaur, though they lived far more recently and are far more closely related to the animals we know today. One of the first great mammals to emerge after the extinction was a creature called Titanomyrma, a giant ant that could grow to over 2 inches in length, larger than a hummingbird. These enormous ants lived in the warm forests that covered much of the world in the early days of the age of mammals, and they probably behaved much like modern ants, living in colonies with queens and workers, building nests in the soil or in fallen trees. But their size made them formidable, larger than many of the mammals of their time, and they remind us that for millions of years after the dinosaurs, the world was a strange place, a place where the rules of size and dominance were still being written. Another early mammal that deserves mention is Leptictidium, a small creature that hopped on its hind legs like a tiny kangaroo. Leptictidium was only about 2 feet long, including its tail, and it probably weighed no more than a few pounds. But it was a successful creature, thriving in the forests of Europe for millions of years. It had a long, flexible snout that it used to probe the leaf litter for insects and worms, and it spent its nights hopping through the darkness, a small, gentle creature in a world that was still finding its new order. As the millions of years passed, mammals grew larger and more diverse, filling the roles once occupied by dinosaurs, and some of them grew very large indeed. One of the most impressive was Paraceratherium, also known as Indricotherium, the largest land mammal that has ever lived. Paraceratherium was a hornless rhinoceros, a relative of the rhinos that still exist today, but it was far, far larger than any modern rhinoceros. It could stand over 18 feet tall at the shoulder, making it taller than a giraffe, and it may have weighed as much as 20 tons, heavier than 4 full-grown African elephants. Prehistoric lived in the forests and savannas of Asia about 25 million years ago, browsing on the leaves and branches of tall trees. Its long neck allowed it to reach food that was beyond the reach of any other animal, and its massive size protected it from predators. It was a gentle giant, a peaceful herbivore that spent its days wandering slowly through the prehistoric landscape, eating its fill, resting in the shade during the heat of the day. Prehistoric was successful for millions of years, spreading across much of Asia, but it eventually went extinct, perhaps due to climate change, perhaps due to competition from other herbivores. But its fossils remain, a testament to a time when mammals grew to sizes that seem almost impossible today. Another remarkable creature of this era was Chalicothere, an animal that looked like it had been assembled from the parts of several different animals. Chalicotheres were relatives of horses and rhinoceroses, but they had evolved in a very different direction from their cousins. Instead of hooves, Chalicotheres had long, curved claws on their front feet, which they used to pull down branches and strip leaves from trees. They walked on their knuckles, like gorillas, keeping their claws clear of the ground. Their bodies were heavy and sloping, with powerful front limbs and shorter hind limbs, giving them a somewhat ape-like posture. Chalicotheres lived across Europe, Asia, Africa, and North America for tens of millions of years, and they were a common sight in the forests of the Miocene epoch. They were peaceful herbivores, spending their days in the shade of the trees, reaching up with their great claws to gather leaves and fruit. Their strange combination of features, horse-like head, gorilla-like arms, sloping body, shows us that evolution has no predetermined plan, that it simply produces whatever works, whatever combination of traits allows a creature to survive and reproduce. And for Chalicotheres, this strange combination worked very well indeed for millions upon millions of years. Among the strangest of all prehistoric mammals were the ancient relatives of elephants, creatures called proboscideans, which experimented with a bewildering variety of trunk and tusk configurations. One of the most peculiar was Platybelodon, an elephant relative that lived about 15 million years ago. Platybelodon had a normal trunk, but its lower jaw was extended into 2 broad, flat tusks that looked almost like shovels or scoops. These tusks may have been used to scoop up water plants from the bottoms of lakes and rivers, or perhaps to strip bark from trees. When Platybelodon opened its mouth, it looked like it was wearing a pair of flat, bony mittens on its lower jaw, a sight that seems almost comical to our modern eyes. But Platybelodon was a successful animal, thriving across Asia, Africa, and North America for millions of years. Its strange tusks were clearly an effective adaptation, a solution to some ecological problem that worked well enough to persist through countless generations. Platybelodon reminds us that nature is endlessly creative, always experimenting with new forms, new solutions, new ways of surviving in a changing world. Another peculiar proboscidean was Dinotherium, an enormous elephant relative whose tusks curved downward and backward from its lower jaw, Like a pair of great hooks, Dinotherium could grow to over 15 feet tall at the shoulder, making it one of the largest land animals of its time. Its downward curving tusks were probably used for digging up roots or stripping bark from trees, though scientists are still debating exactly how Dinotherium lived and fed. Dinotherium was a long-lived genus, surviving for over 20 million years before finally going extinct about 1 million years ago. It lived alongside our early human ancestors, and it is possible that they encountered these great beasts, watched them from a distance as they browsed through the African forests. Dinotherium was a gentle giant, a peaceful herbivore that wanted nothing more than to find its next meal and a cool place to rest. And in its long, successful tenure on Earth, it reminds us that strange forms can be stable forms, that evolution does not always favor the normal or the expected. As we gently move on through our journey, let us visit South America, a continent that was isolated from the rest of the world for tens of millions of years. During this long isolation, South America became a laboratory of evolution, producing creatures found nowhere else on Earth, animals so strange and wonderful that they seem like they belong in a fantasy novel rather than in the fossil record. One of the most remarkable South American creatures was Macrauchenia, an animal that combined the features of a camel, a horse, and an elephant in a way that seems almost absurd. Macrauchenia was about 10 feet long and stood perhaps 5 feet tall at the shoulder. It had long, slender legs like a horse, a long neck like a camel, and a short, trunk-like nose that may have been used for grasping vegetation. Its nostrils were located not at the end of its nose, but on top of its head, between its eyes, giving it a profile unlike any other animal that has ever lived. Macrauchenia was a grazer, feeding on the grasses and low-growing plants of the South American pampas. It was probably a fast runner, able to escape from the predators of its time through speed rather than strength. And it was one of the last survivors of an ancient group of South American mammals called the Lidopterns, creatures that had evolved in isolation for so long that they had developed forms found nowhere else on Earth. When Europeans first discovered Macrauchenia fossils in the 1830s, they were so baffled by the creature's combination of features that they couldn't decide what kind of animal it was. Charles Darwin himself collected some of the first Macrauchenia bones, and he puzzled over them for years, trying to understand how such a strange creature could have evolved. Another South American wonder was Toxodon, a large, heavy animal that looked something like a cross between a hippopotamus and a rhinoceros. Toxodon could weigh over 3,000 pounds and stood about 5 feet tall at the shoulder. It had a barrel-shaped body, short legs, and a small head with a curious arrangement of teeth. Its front teeth were large and chisel-like, while its back teeth were arranged in a pattern that allowed it to grind up tough vegetation with ease. Toxodon was one of the most common large herbivores in South America for millions of years, grazing on the grasslands and browsing in the forests that covered the continent. Darwin described Toxodon as perhaps one of the strangest animals ever discovered, and he was fascinated by its unique combination of features. Toxodon was a member of an extinct group called the no-town-gillets, creatures that evolved in South America during its long isolation and developed forms unlike anything else on Earth. When South America eventually connected with North America, about 3 million years ago, Toxodon and many other South American natives faced new competition from northern invaders. But Toxodon survived for millions of years after this connection, only going extinct about 11,000 years ago, possibly due to hunting by early humans or climate change at the end of the last ice age. Perhaps the most famous of South America's bizarre prehistoric beasts were the glyptodonts, giant armored relatives of modern armadillos. Glyptodont itself was a creature about the size of a small car, covered in a dome of bony armor that made it look like a living tank. This armor was made up of over 1,000 individual plates, fused together into a solid shell that covered the animal's entire back and sides. Only its head, legs, and tail extended beyond this protective dome. Glyptodont was an herbivore, grazing on the grasses of the South American plains. It was a slow-moving creature, protected from predators not by speed but by its incredible armor. Some species of glyptodont had clubs at the ends of their tails, bony masses that could be swung like a medieval mace to discourage attackers. Others had spikes along the edges of their shells, making them even more difficult to attack. Glyptodont and its relatives were one of the great successes of South American evolution, surviving for tens of millions of years and diversifying into dozens of species of various sizes and shapes. Closely related to the glyptodonts were the ground sloths, creatures that have fascinated scientists and lay people alike since their fossils were first discovered. The largest of these was Megatherium, the giant ground sloth, a creature that could grow to over 20 feet in length and weigh several tons. When Megatherium reared up on its hind legs, it could stand perhaps 17 feet tall, towering over the landscape like a shaggy, lumbering giant. Megatherium had enormous claws on its front feet, claws that could be up to 7 inches long. Despite their fearsome appearance, these claws were probably used not for hunting, but for pulling down branches and digging up roots. Megatherium was an herbivore, a gentle giant that spent its days browsing on the vegetation of the South American forests and grasslands. It moved slowly, ponderous, taking its time as it wandered from tree to tree, from patch to patch of edible plants. Its thick skin and massive size protected it from predators, and it had little to fear from any animal that lived alongside it. Megatherium went extinct only about 10,000 years ago, which means that early humans in South America almost certainly encountered these remarkable creatures. Archaeological evidence suggests that humans may have hunted Megatherium, though given the animal's size and power, such hunts must have been dangerous undertakings. The extinction of Megatherium and other giant ground sloths coincided with the arrival of humans in the Americas and with climate changes at the end of the last ice age. Which of these factors was most important remains a subject of debate, but what is certain is that these wonderful creatures are now gone, surviving only in the fossils that tell their story. Let us pause here for a moment and simply breathe. We have traveled far together, from the ancient seas of the Cambrian to the grasslands of prehistoric South America, encountering creatures so strange and wonderful that they seem like they belong in dreams. And there is something deeply calming about this journey, something peaceful about drifting through deep time, about letting go of the present moment and floating backward into the past. The night is quiet around you. Perhaps you can feel your body growing heavier, more relaxed, sinking deeper into wherever you are resting. That is good. That is exactly as it should be. These ancient stories will continue whether you are awake or asleep, and you are welcome to drift off whenever you feel ready. There is no test at the end, no quiz to pass. This is simply a journey through wonder, a quiet exploration of the many forms that life has taken on this remarkable planet of ours. As we continue, let us visit another isolated land, a place where evolution took a path all its own, producing creatures found nowhere else on Earth. This is Australia, a continent that has been separated from the rest of the world for tens of millions of years, a place where marsupials and monotremes have flourished in the absence of the placental mammals that dominate other continents. One of the most remarkable Australian creatures was Diprotodon, the largest marsupial that has ever lived. Diprotodon was about the size of a hippopotamus, standing perhaps 6 feet tall at the shoulder and weighing over 2 tons. It had a barrel-shaped body, thick legs, and a large head with forward-facing eyes and powerful jaws. Like a modern wombat, Diprotodon was a burrowing animal, or at least a relative of burrowing animals, though it was far too large to dig its own burrows. Diprotodon was an herbivore, browsing on the vegetation of the Australian outback. It probably lived in herds, wandering across the landscape in search of food and water. Fossil evidence suggests that Diprotodon populations sometimes became trapped in muddy waterholes during droughts, dying in large numbers as the water dried up. These mass death assemblages provide valuable information about how Diprotodon lived and moved across the landscape, giving us glimpses into a world that vanished only about 45,000 years ago. Another remarkable Australian marsupial was Thylacoleo, the marsupial lion, one of the most powerful predators that has ever lived in Australia. Thylacoleo was about the size of a leopard, but its jaws were far more powerful than any cat's. Its large, shearing premolar teeth could slice through meat and bone with ease, giving Thylacoleo one of the most powerful bites relative to its size of any mammal that has ever lived. Thylacoleo was a hunter, preying on the large herbivores that roamed the Australian landscape, including Diprotodon and other giant marsupials. It had strong, retractable claws on its front feet, which it may have used to grip prey or to climb trees. Some scientists believe that Thylacoleo was an ambush predator, dropping onto its prey from above, while others think it was a pursuit hunter, chasing down its victims across the open terrain. Whatever its hunting strategy, Thylacoleo was clearly a formidable predator, and its extinction about 30,000 years ago coincided with the arrival of humans in Australia. Among the strangest Australian creatures was Procoptodon, the giant short-faced kangaroo. Modern kangaroos are remarkable enough, with their powerful hind legs and their ability to hop at speeds of over 30 miles per hour. But Procoptodon was something else entirely. It stood nearly 10 feet tall and weighed over 500 pounds, making it the largest kangaroo that has ever lived. Unlike modern kangaroos, Procoptodon had a short, flat face and forward-facing eyes, giving it a strangely human-like appearance. Scientists believe that Procoptodon may not have hopped like modern kangaroos. Its hind legs were structured differently, and it may have walked in a more upright, striding gait, almost like a human. Its front limbs were long and powerful, with only 2 functional fingers on each hand, which it probably used to pull down branches and gather vegetation. Procoptodon was an herbivore, feeding on the leaves and branches of trees and shrubs, and it was perfectly adapted to the dry, open woodlands of Ice Age Australia. Procoptodon went extinct about 15,000 years ago, another casualty of the Great Extinction Event that swept away much of Australia's megafauna. The causes of this extinction are still debated, with some scientists blaming human hunting and others pointing to climate change at the end of the last ice age. What is certain is that the Australia of today, with its kangaroos and koalas and wombats, is only a shadow of the Australia that existed when the first humans arrived, a land of giants that we can now only imagine through the fossils they left behind. Let us travel now to yet another place, to the waters of the ancient seas, where some of the most remarkable transformations in the history of life were taking place. About 50 million years ago, a group of hoofed mammals began to venture into the water, slowly adapting to an aquatic lifestyle over millions of years. These creatures would eventually give rise to the whales and dolphins that swim in our oceans today. But their early ancestors were strange, transitional forms that seem like they belong in a fever dream. One of the earliest of these proto-whales was Pakicetus, a creature that lived in what is now Pakistan about 50 million years ago. Pakicetus was about the size of a wolf, with 4 legs, a long tail, and a narrow snout filled with sharp teeth. It looked nothing like a whale, more like a dog or a small deer, and if you saw it walking along the shores of an ancient river, you would never guess that its descendants would one day become the largest animals on Earth. But Pakicetus had a secret hidden in its skull. Its ears were structured in a way that was unique among mammals, a way that was adapted for hearing underwater. This suggests that Pakicetus spent a significant amount of time in the water, hunting fish and other aquatic prey, even though it still lived primarily on land. Pakicetus was the beginning of a journey, the first step on a path that would lead from the forests and rivers of ancient Asia to the open oceans of the entire world. As millions of years passed, the descendants of Pakicetus became more and more aquatic. One of these descendants was Ambulocetus, a creature whose name means walking whale, a name that perfectly describes its transitional nature. Ambulocetus was about 10 feet long, with 4 short legs, webbed feet, and a long, powerful tail. It probably swam like an otter, undulating its body and tail through the water, while still being able to walk on land when necessary. Ambulocetus was a predator, an ambush hunter that probably lurked in the shallow waters near shore, waiting for prey to come within reach. Its jaws were long and filled with sharp teeth, and its eyes were positioned on the top of its head, allowing it to see above the water while the rest of its body remained submerged. Ambulocetus was a creature caught between two worlds, not fully aquatic but no longer fully terrestrial, a living example of evolution in action. Later still came Basilosaurus, a creature that was fully aquatic, a true whale in almost every sense of the word. Basilosaurus could grow to over 60 feet in length, making it one of the largest animals in the oceans of its time. Its body was long and serpentine, quite different from the barrel-shaped bodies of modern whales, and it probably swam with an undulating snake-like motion. Its front limbs had become flippers, perfectly adapted for steering through the water, while its hind limbs had shrunk to tiny vestiges, useless for walking, hidden within its body. Basilosaurus was a predator, hunting fish, sharks, and perhaps other marine mammals in the warm, shallow seas that covered much of Europe and North America about 40 million years ago. When its fossils were first discovered in the early 1800s, scientists thought they were looking at a giant sea serpent, a marine reptile left over from the age of dinosaurs. It was only later that they realized Basilosaurus was a mammal, a whale, a creature that breathed air and nursed its young, just like all whales do today. The transformation from Pachycetus to Basilosaurus, from a small, dog-like creature to a 60-foot-long ocean predator, is one of the most remarkable evolutionary stories in the history of life. It shows us that evolution has no limits, that given enough time, creatures can adapt to almost any environment, can transform from one form to another in ways that seem almost miraculous. And it reminds us that the whales we see today, those gentle giants that sing their songs in the deep ocean, are the descendants of small, furry creatures that once walked on four legs, that once ran through the forests of ancient Asia, that once looked up at the sky and had no idea that their descendants would one day swim through the endless blue. Among the many remarkable marine mammals that have existed, few are as awe-inspiring as Leviathan, a giant sperm whale that lived about 12 million years ago. Leviathan was named after the biblical sea monster Leviathan, and it more than earned that name. It could grow to perhaps 50 feet in length, and its jaws were filled with enormous teeth, some of which were over a foot long, longer than the teeth of any other predator that has ever lived. Leviathan was a predator, a hunter of other whales and marine mammals. Unlike modern sperm whales, which feed primarily on squid and fish, Leviathan was a flesh eater, a marine apex predator that had no rivals in the ancient seas. It probably fed on small to medium-sized whales, dolphins, and seals, using its massive teeth to grab and hold its prey while it thrashed and tore them apart. Leviathan was the terror of the Miocene seas, a creature that inspired fear in every other animal that shared its waters. And yet, Leviathan was also a mammal, a creature that breathed air and nursed its young, that lived in social groups and communicated with calls and songs. It was not a mindless monster, but a complex animal with its own behaviors and relationships, its own joys and fears. The oceans of the Miocene were not empty of beauty or wonder, despite the presence of such formidable predators. Life continued, as it always does, finding its balance between danger and survival, between predator and prey. As we gently move on through our journey, let us visit the skies of the ancient world, where some of the most remarkable creatures that have ever flown once soared on wings of skin and bone. The pterosaurs, the flying reptiles of the Mesozoic era, included some of the largest flying animals that have ever existed, creatures that make even the largest modern birds seem tiny by comparison. The largest of all pterosaurs, and indeed the largest flying animal that has ever lived, was Quetzalcoatlus, named after the Aztec feathered serpent god. Quetzalcoatlus had a wingspan of perhaps 35 feet, wider than many small airplanes, and when it stood on the ground, it was as tall as a giraffe. Its long, pointed beak was perfect for catching fish or probing for small animals, and its great wings allowed it to soar effortlessly on the thermal currents that rose from the warm Cretaceous landscape. Quetzalcoatlus was not a dinosaur, though it lived alongside the dinosaurs and went extinct in the same catastrophe that ended their reign. It was a pterosaur, a member of a group of flying reptiles that had evolved independently of both birds and dinosaurs. Pterosaurs were the first vertebrates to achieve powered flight, beating their wings to fly rather than simply gliding, and they dominated the skies of the Mesozoic for over 160 million years. Imagine Quetzalcoatlus now, soaring high above the Cretaceous landscape, its great wings barely moving as it rides the rising air. Below, the world stretches out in shades of green and brown, forests and rivers and distant mountains. Dinosaurs move slowly through the vegetation, unaware of the great shadow that passes overhead, and Quetzalcoatlus flies on, effortlessly, endlessly, a creature perfectly adapted to its aerial realm, a living marvel of engineering that seems too large, too magnificent to be real. Another remarkable pterosaur was Hatzegopteryx, a creature that lived on an island in what is now Romania during the late Cretaceous period. Hatzegopteryx was nearly as large as Quetzalcoatlus, with a wingspan of perhaps 30 feet, but it was built differently, more robustly, with a shorter, more powerful neck and a massive skull. Scientists believe that Hatzegopteryx may have been a predator of small dinosaurs, stalking its prey on the ground rather than catching fish from the air. The island where Hatzegopteryx lived was home to a strange fauna, where many of the normal rules of size were reversed. The dinosaurs on this island were smaller than their mainland relatives, while the pterosaurs and other predators were larger. This phenomenon, known as island dwarfism and island gigantism, is well known from modern island ecosystems, and it suggests that the island of Hatzegopteryx was a unique world, a place where the normal rules of life had been subtly altered by the constraints of isolation. Hatzegopteryx was probably the top predator on its island, hunting the dwarf dinosaurs that grazed on the vegetation. It may have walked on all fours, using its folded wings as front legs, stalking through the forests like a giant, featherless stork. When it found its prey, it could strike with lightning speed, using its massive beak to dispatch its victim before swallowing it whole. Hatzegopteryx was a creature of nightmares for the small dinosaurs of its island, a terror from the sky that could appear at any moment from any direction. As we continue our journey, let us consider some of the creatures that lived in the more recent past, the ice ages that swept across the Earth over the last few million years. These ice ages brought profound changes to the planet, covering much of the northern hemisphere with vast sheets of ice, lowering sea levels by hundreds of feet, and creating a world very different from the one we know today. And in this Ice Age world, there lived some of the most remarkable creatures that have ever existed, giants that walked the earth until just a few thousand years ago. Among the most famous of these Ice Age giants were the woolly mammoths, the shaggy relatives of modern elephants that roamed the frozen steppes of Europe, Asia, and North America. Woolly mammoths were well adapted to the cold, with thick coats of hair, small ears to reduce heat loss, and layers of insulating fat beneath their skin. They were about the size of modern African elephants, standing perhaps 10 feet tall at the shoulder and weighing several tons. Woolly mammoths are well known, of course, but they had relatives that were far more bizarre. One of these was the Columbian mammoth, a larger species that lived in the warmer parts of North America. Columbian mammoths could stand over 13 feet tall at the shoulder, making them among the largest land animals that have ever lived in North America. They had less hair than their woolly cousins, an adaptation to the warmer climate of the southern regions. Another Ice Age elephant was the mastodon, a more distant relative of mammoths and modern elephants. Mastodons were forest dwellers, browsing on the leaves and branches of trees rather than grazers like the mammoths. They had straighter tusks and a different tooth structure, adapted for their different diet. Mastodons lived across North and Central America until about 10,000 years ago, when they went extinct along with most of the other Ice Age megafauna. Among the most frightening predators of the Ice Age was the saber-toothed cat, Smilodon, a creature with fangs so long that they extended well below its jaw. Smilodon was about the size of a modern lion, but it was more heavily built, with powerful front legs and a relatively short tail. Its famous fangs, which could grow to over 7 inches in length, were probably used to dispatch prey quickly, slashing through the soft tissue of the throat or belly. Smilodon was a pack hunter, working in groups to bring down large prey like mastodons, ground sloths, and bison. Its fangs, as impressive as they were also fragile and would have broken if Smilodon tried to use them on struggling prey. Scientists believe that Smilodon used its fangs only on prey that had already been immobilized, delivering a killing bite after the prey was held down by the rest of the pack. Smilodon went extinct about 10,000 years ago, another casualty of the changes that swept the world at the end of the last Ice Age. Another remarkable Ice Age predator was the dire wolf, a larger and more powerful relative of the modern gray wolf. Dire wolves could weigh up to 150 pounds, significantly heavier than most modern wolves, and they had stronger jaws and larger teeth. They were pack hunters like modern wolves, but they probably specialized in larger prey, using their greater size and strength to bring down Ice Age bison, horses, and camels. The La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles have yielded thousands of dire wolf skeletons, more than any other large mammal. Scientists believe that dire wolves were attracted to the tar pits by the cries of trapped prey animals, only to become trapped themselves. These fossils give us a remarkably detailed picture of dire wolf life and death, showing us everything from their diet to the injuries they suffered during their lives. Among the strangest Ice Age mammals was the giant ground sloth that we mentioned earlier. But there were many species of ground sloths, ranging from small, dog-sized creatures to giants as large as elephants. One of the more unusual was Nothrotheriops, a medium-sized ground sloth that lived in the deserts of the American Southwest. Nothrotheriops fed on desert plants, including yucca and cactus, and it probably spent much of its time in caves, which provided shelter from the harsh desert sun. Remarkably, scientists have found preserved dung from Nothrotheriops in caves in the Southwest, dung that is over 10,000 years old but still recognizable as the waste product of a ground sloth. This dung has been analyzed to reveal exactly what Nothrotheriops was eating, providing a level of detail about its diet that is rare for such ancient creatures. Nothrotheriops was a gentle creature, a vegetarian that wanted nothing more than to find its next meal and a cool place to rest. Its extinction, like that of so many other Ice Age animals, coincided with the arrival of humans in the Americas. As we near the end of our journey, let us visit one more group of creatures, the terror birds, the dominant predators of South America for millions of years. Terror birds, or phorusrhacids, were large, flightless birds with powerful legs and enormous hooked beaks. The largest of them, Kalenkin, stood nearly 10 feet tall and had a skull over 2 feet in length, larger than the skull of a horse. These were not gentle creatures, but fierce predators, the top carnivores of their South American home. Terror birds evolved to fill the role of top predator in an ecosystem that lacked large mammalian carnivores. For tens of millions of years, they dominated the South American plains, hunting the strange mammals that had evolved in isolation on that continent. They were fast runners, able to chase down prey on the open grasslands, and their massive beaks were capable of delivering devastating blows to their victims. When North and South America connected about 3 million years ago, terror birds faced new competition from northern predators like saber-toothed cats and bears. But some terror birds survived this competition, and one species, Titanus, actually migrated northward, establishing populations in what is now Texas and Florida. Titanus was one of the last of the terror birds, surviving until perhaps 1.5 million years ago, when it finally went extinct, the last of its remarkable lineage. The story of the terror birds reminds us that birds are dinosaurs, the only dinosaurs that survived the Great Extinction 66 million years ago. When the non-avian dinosaurs disappeared, their bird relatives inherited the Earth, diversifying into thousands of species that fill every ecological niche from the deep ocean to the highest mountains. And for a time, in the isolation of South America, birds once again became the dominant predators, reclaiming a role that their non-avian ancestors had held during the Mesozoic era. Now, As we begin to slow our journey, as we let the pace of our exploration become gentler and more peaceful, let us reflect on what we have seen. We have traveled through billions of years of Earth's history, encountering creatures so strange and wonderful that they seem like they belong in dreams rather than in fossils. We have met the bizarre swimmers of the Cambrian seas, the armored giants of the Devonian, the sail-backed synapsids of the Permian, the peculiar dinosaurs of the Mesozoic, and the remarkable mammals of the age that followed. Each of these creatures, no matter how strange, was perfectly adapted to its world, a world that has since changed beyond recognition. They lived their lives fully, eating and sleeping and raising their young, unaware that one day creatures like us would look back across the vast gulf of time and wonder at their forms. And in that unknowing, there is something profoundly peaceful, something that reminds us that the universe is vast and strange and full of wonders that we can barely begin to imagine. The night is quiet now. Perhaps you can feel your breathing slowing, your body growing heavier, more relaxed. That is good. You have traveled far tonight, through ages and eras, through worlds that no longer exist. You have seen creatures that no human eye ever saw in life, creatures that survive now only in the fossils they left behind. And in that journey, perhaps you have found a kind of peace, a reminder that you are part of something much larger than yourself, something that stretches back through billions of years and will continue long after any of us are gone. If you have enjoyed this quiet journey through deep time, you are always welcome to return. There are more stories to tell, more creatures to meet, more wonders to discover. This channel is a place of gentle exploration, a place where you can drift off to sleep while learning about the marvels of the universe. The light is dim here, the pace is slow, and the stories are endless. For now, let yourself rest. Let the strange and wonderful creatures of the past drift through your dreams. They are waiting there, in the spaces between waking and sleeping, the gentle giants and peculiar wanderers that once called this earth their home. They have waited millions of years for someone to remember them, and tonight you have given them that gift. So close your eyes if they are not closed already. Let your thoughts slow and soften. The journey will continue whenever you are ready, but for now, there is only this moment, this quiet, peaceful moment at the end of a long and wonderful night. Sleep well, gentle traveler. The stars are turning slowly overhead, as they have turned for billions of years. The Earth is spinning gently through space, as it has spun since its formation. And somewhere, in the rocks beneath your feet, the ancient creatures rest, their bones turned to stone, their stories waiting to be told. You are part of this great story, this endless tale of life on Earth. You are connected to every creature that has ever lived, from the strange swimmers of the Cambrian to the gentle mammals of the Ice Age. You are made of the same atoms, the same elements, the same stardust that made them. And one day, billions of years from now, when the sun has grown old and the earth has changed beyond recognition, your atoms, too, will be part of something new, something wonderful, something that we cannot even begin to imagine. But that is a story for another night. For now, there is only rest, only peace, only the quiet comfort of knowing that you are part of something vast and beautiful and eternal. Sleep well, dream well, and may the strange and wonderful creatures of the past keep you company through the long, gentle night. The darkness is soft around you, like a blanket. The silence is comfortable, like the embrace of an old friend. There is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to worry about. The world will continue turning without you for a little while, and when you wake, it will still be here, full of wonders and marvels waiting to be discovered. So rest now. Rest deeply and peacefully, knowing that you are safe, that you are held, that you are part of the great story of life on Earth. The ancient creatures are with you, their spirits drifting through the darkness, their forms flickering at the edges of your dreams. They are not frightening but comforting, reminders that life has always found a way, that even the strangest forms can be beautiful, that even the most ancient creatures are still with us, in some way, in the fossils and